Dr. Helen Thompson had always liked Clapham. It was quiet enough for a retired woman who valued her peace, yet close enough to central London that she could still feel the city's pulse when she wanted to. Her two-bedroom flat on the second floor of a converted Victorian house was exactly as she liked it. Neat, unpretentious, filled with books rather than showy art. The furniture was comfortable but not new. The kitchen smelled faintly of Earl Grey and the rosemary she grew on the windowsill. To her son, James, she was simply Mum, the sensible NHS consultant who had retired at 59 after 30 years of fixing broken bodies in overstretched hospitals. He worried about her pension. He offered to help with her council tax. He once tried to sign her up for a senior citizen's bus pass. Helen let him. It amused her. What James didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that the sensible Dr. Thompson had spent the last 2 decades quietly building something else entirely. It had started small. A colleague in the private sector mentioned a cosmetic clinic in need of an investor. Helen, who had always been good with numbers and better with scalpels, put in her savings. Then she bought another. Then she restructured the management, brought in better surgeons, and modernized the branding. Within 8 years, she owned 7 clinics across South and West London. The profits were handsome. She reinvested some into property, tired terraces in Battersea and Stockwell that she flipped after careful renovation, just as the areas gentrified. She sold the clinics at the peak, kept the freeholds on 2 particularly lucrative ones, and quietly became very comfortable indeed. None of it showed. She still shopped at Tesco, still wore the same sensible black leather shoes she'd bought in 2018, still carried the same reusable bag with the faded NHS logo. Appearances, she believed, were useful camouflage. The trouble began when James married Sophie. Sophie's parents, Derek and Vanessa Hargrove, were the kind of couple who had made their money in the beauty industry and never let anyone forget it. They owned a small chain of high-end salons in Surrey, all chrome, white leather, and aggressive Instagram marketing. Derek drove a black Range Rover with personalized plates that read, Beauty One. Vanessa collected handbags the way other women collected teaspoons. They spoke constantly of networking with minor celebrities and once spent an entire Christmas lunch describing how they'd done a little something for a footballer's wife's lips. They had never liked Helen. From the moment they met her at the engagement party, they had decided she was quaint. A harmless little NHS doctor from Clapham who probably counted her pennies and worried about heating bills. They smiled at her with the indulgent pity reserved for people they considered beneath them. Helen had smiled back, thin and polite, and said very little. Now, 6 months after the wedding, the Hargroves had decided it was time for a family dinner. They booked a private dining room at one of Mayfair's most exclusive restaurants. The kind of place where the wine list had no prices and the waiters moved like silent ghosts. The invitation had been framed as generous. Our treat, of course, Vanessa had trilled down the phone. You mustn't worry about anything, Helen, dear. Helen arrived exactly on time, wearing her usual navy wool coat over a simple gray dress. Her handbag was the same sensible black leather one she'd carried for years. In her other hand swung the familiar Tesco reusable bag containing a small box of her homemade shortbread, a peace offering she knew would be quietly binned later. The Hargroves were already seated when she entered. Derek in a shiny navy suit, gold cufflinks flashing. Vanessa in a cream silk blouse and enough diamonds to fund a small clinic. They both rose with theatrical warmth. "Helen, you made it," Vanessa said, kissing the air near both cheeks. "We were worried the traffic from Clapham might hold you up. Do sit down, darling." Helen sat. James and Sophie were already there, looking slightly uncomfortable. James gave his mother an apologetic little smile. Sophie stared at her phone. The first course arrived. Tiny portions of scallop carpaccio arranged like modern art. The wine was poured. Then the remarks began, light and casual, the way people test the water before they decide to drown you. Vanessa eyed Helen's shoes under the table. "Those are very practical, Helen. I do admire women who don't feel the need to follow trends at our age." Derek chuckled. "Quite right. One must be careful with money when you're on a pension, especially in London. Everything's so expensive these days." Helen took a small sip of wine and said nothing. They moved on to the main topic, the children. We've been thinking," Derek said, leaning back with the air of a man about to bestow wisdom. "Now that James and Sophie are married, it's important they have their own space, their own life. We wouldn't want them feeling obligated." Vanessa nodded vigorously. "Exactly. We were saying the other day, perhaps a small allowance from us would help, just to ease things. James could focus on his career, Sophie on her wellness brand, and you, Helen, could enjoy your retirement properly. No need to keep doing those little locum shifts." Helen set her fork down gently. "Locum shifts? Oh, you know." Vanessa waved a manicured hand. "The odd bit of work here and there, we all understand. NHS pensions aren't what they used to be. It must be difficult." James shifted in his seat. "Mom, you don't have to." Helen raised a hand very slightly. The table fell quiet. She looked at Derek and Vanessa for a long moment, her expression calm, almost curious. "You know," she said at last, her voice soft but perfectly clear, "I've always found it fascinating how people assume they know someone's circumstances simply because of the shoes they wear." Derek laughed, a little too loudly. "Come now, Helen. No need to be sensitive. We're family." "Are we?" Helen asked mildly. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Of course we are, darling. That's why we wanted to help. A little monthly allowance. Say, £2,000, just to make sure you're comfortable. In return, perhaps you could give the children a bit more space. You understand." Helen reached into her handbag and took out a small black card holder. She placed it on the table beside her plate. The gold lettering caught the candlelight. Coutts. The table went very still. "I appreciate the offer," Helen said, "but I don't think that will be necessary." She signaled the waiter with a small gesture. The young man appeared instantly. "The bill, please," Helen said, "for the entire table." Derek started to protest. "Now, wait a minute." Helen ignored him. When the leather folder arrived, she opened it, glanced at the total without reaction, and placed her Coutts card inside with a quiet snap. While they waited for the card machine, she turned back to the Hargroves. "You mentioned my sensible shoes," she said conversationally. "I've worn them in operating theaters for years. They're comfortable when you're standing for 8 hours straight, cutting people open with rather more precision than your manners this evening, I might add." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Helen continued, her tone still mild, almost gentle. "You own 3 salons in Surrey, I believe? The ones in Guildford, Esher, and Weybridge?" Derek blinked. "How did you—" "I own the freeholds on 2 of them," Helen said simply. Acquired them through a property company 3 years ago. The leases come up for renewal next year. I was planning to be quite reasonable about the terms. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophie's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. James stared at his mother as though she had grown a second head. Helen smiled, small and calm. "Money," she said, "doesn't buy class, darlings. It only rents it for a while. And the lease on yours appears to be rather short." She signed the receipt with a neat doctor's signature, tucked the card away, and rose from the table. "I've enjoyed the evening far more than I expected," she told them. "Do give my regards to your celebrity clients, and perhaps next time, before you offer someone an allowance, you might check who actually owns the roof over your head." She picked up her Tesco reusable bag, gave James a quick kiss on the cheek, and walked out of the private dining room with the same quiet dignity she had shown when entering. Behind her, the Hargroves sat frozen among the ruins of their expensive dinner. In the taxi back to Clapham, Helen leaned her head against the window and allowed herself a small private smile. She had always believed in precision, in surgery, in business, and in life. Some lessons, she thought, were best delivered with a very sharp scalpel.